Thanks for joining us for another episode of Biotech and Life Sciences CEO Stories. Today, we're pleased to have Mike Walsh, CEO of Patient Advocacy Strategies, as our guest. He uses almost 30 years' experience with such well-known life sciences institutions as Genentech, Biogen, and MedImmune to help smaller biotechs connect and develop partnership with patient groups in their field of disease therapeutic, as well as accessing that same connection to improve clinical trial selection. Thanks for joining us, Mike. You've been the founder, CEO, entrepreneur in residence at PAS now for, I guess, 8 years, give or take, after having spent most of your career in kind of a stable career path at major pharmas. What inspired you to start Patient Advocacy Strategies?
It's a great question, Tim. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I spent my whole career, 22 years in life sciences started out in commercial and really got passionate about being the patient-facing representative of a company. And like you said, at the companies that I was with, I saw the dramatic impact that forging proactive partnerships with patients could have on the companies I worked for, and saw all these clinical stage companies that didn't yet have a centralized advocacy function, but knew that they wanted to start to incorporate patient advocacy and engagement into their work, but didn't really know how to do it because, a lot of CEOs will look at this as an all or nothing thing. Like, we have to get patient advocacy into our company. Well, we have to hire a VP and pay them $300,000 a year and build a team, but you really don't need to do that. And, I'm in Boston, so I would gather with the Mass Bio delegation of, I think there are 2,500 companies who are in the Mass Bio ecosystem here in Massachusetts. And I talk to these CEOs who, all over their pitch decks say, everything we do is about the patient. And I'd ask, what's your patient advocacy sort of strategy? And they'd say, well, we organize fundraising walks and we go to gala events and we write checks. And so I knew there was an opportunity to change the way of thinking from those sort of traditional transactional patient advocacy activities and start to instill more of a strategic mindset that they can engage with patients early and often and build solutions that are beyond just the check, right? Patient groups are so sophisticated these days, and so are individual patients, that they don't just want a check, they want a partner and they want to be heard. And so, instilling this culture of listening to understand, leadership teams and cross-functional partners within a biotech company at any size can value from listening to understand and building that trust with patient groups to learn more about what it's like to live with a condition that these companies are dedicating their investment in clinical programs to addressing. So when I would talk to these CEOs and they'd say, yeah, we're kind of doing it on our own now, and then they realize that they're not really doing it the right way, I knew there was a business opportunity to create and sort of exploit that opportunity. And so, yeah, I launched Patient Advocacy Strategies 8 years ago, and it's the best thing I ever did. We currently work with companies, excuse me, at all stages of development. We're working with 3 preclinical companies right now, a lot of clinical stage companies, and then we continue the work with fully commercial, post-launch companies, and it's great because it looks different, depending on the nuances of the patient community that we're working with, the culture of the company, but to try to, find that sweet spot, address mutual needs and address unmet medical needs with solutions from the company that really is innovative and strategic, helps the company put their best foot forward and addresses, the needs of these communities. So it's really win-win.
Let's step back for a second. And, for many of these companies where they're small, money's dear. It's certainly more dear now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And in many cases, they're not even in the clinic. So why is it important for them to try and engage patient groups early on in their life cycle?
Yeah, because gleaning insights from patient communities, right, from patients, caregivers, providers, investigators, the whole sort of ecosystem of a certain disease condition that the company has dedicated resources to try to address, the insights and perspectives of lived experience go way beyond just say a trial. Like they can inform everything a company does, from what the website looks like and how it speaks to patients, to getting into study design and protocol development, really pressure testing their thesis off of patients and finding out what meaningful outcomes, meaningful endpoints might be for the study. The best studies have patient fingerprints all over them because it's been refined through input from patient communities. And these companies that are not yet in the clinic, if they're deliberate about their intent to listen to understand the communities, they'll build a clinical trial that's right sized and meets the needs of the community and sets the company up for success as far as demonstrating safety and efficacy. And patients are so sophisticated these days that they want a seat at the table and they want to have a voice, and they want not just to have a voice, but to have their voice heard. So a company has a really unique opportunity to show that they're listening the in their intent to build trust. They can demonstrate that they're listening by designing a trial and building a company that is informed by the perspectives gleaned from patients. So you don't have to do a lot. There's a lot you can do with patients, but I recognize that a lot of these early stage companies have limited funding. You don't have to do everything, but you have to do something, and it starts with asking questions and bringing patients to the table, and really again listening to understand, not to reply. And I think the old version of patient advocacy in big pharma was sort of bring people to the table, have a patient advisory board session. You ask questions, you listen, but you don't necessarily understand. You listen to respond. And so I think getting these innovative companies to listen to understand and practice what they preach and put these insights into action really benefits all stakeholders.
It's interesting that you continue to refer to listen to understand, because many, and I say this with all due respect because I love the people, but many of the people doing the real science, one of the reasons they do it is that they get to do it somewhat in their own little space, their own little world. So there must be hurdles in teaching, I guess, how to actively listen.
Yeah, it's I don't think, it wasn't a thing, it wasn't the standard historically, right? Everybody kind of stayed in their lane and was in their box in the matrix and did their work and went home. And I think when you open their eyes to all the value that comes in insights from patient communities, whether it's a clinical operations team, whether it's a commercial team, whether it's the leadership team, once they see how valuable those insights can be and apply it to their work, um, they're looking for as much as possible. And yeah, I mean, a scientist isn't probably going to go out and actually interface with patients, but I mean, we do that, and we'll glean the data and report back with strategic recommendations and really make these insights actionable, depending on what function, there's an opportunity to do so.
But
So it's all fascinating.
on the other hand, I've found that so many small biotechs have been founded by people who either are experiencing the disease themselves or someone close to them is. So they're kind of, by definition, the patient group.
Right. Yeah.
Are there reasons why they might still need, outside help to assist with patient outreach?
Yeah, I mean, I think because if you have somebody who starts a company, it's an N of one, right? And they may or may not be tied into the broader community, but we like to glean as much data and intel from the totality of the community. You can have relationships with the patient groups, but a lot of rare diseases might have a number of different patient groups, but there might be just as impactful and influential individual patient advocates who may or may not be affiliated with the advocacy groups, and they might have in perspectives that on the disease that might differ from the big or the advocacy group itself. So, we have like a social listening tool that we kind of monitor who's talking about which diseases and where. And it's not always the patient groups, the nonprofits. It's oftentimes, an influential mother of a twin Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients. And, they might not have ever been affiliated with the advocacy groups, but they're super influential in their own right. We have one of those who actually works on our team and, has been responsible for galvanizing the community for regulatory, FDA advisory committee meetings and such. Who isn't necessarily affiliated with any of the advocacy groups. So I think getting a broad sample gives you better data and better insights to act on as a company. But it's funny when you were talking about the scientists. We did a program a couple of years ago for a company. We found that internally, the scientists at the company and most of the employees had never met a patient with the condition that they had launched this company to address, which I thought was remarkable that, somebody's been in a career for 30 years studying, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and they had never met a patient with it. So we actually did like a buddy program where we paired a scientist with a patient and made the introduction and had them sort of take their own relationship organically. And it was one of the best programs we've ever done. It instilled it empowered the teams internally to really have that much more meaning in the work that they do every day in their labs.
I'm surprised that in that particular disease, Duchenne, which has, the most substantial advocacy group, I think, of any rare disease that I can think of offhand, that would occur. I always think of life sciences founders as dedicated to patients, more than money, more than almost anything else. So what kind of pushback do you get from the sense that, oh, we got this kind of mantra? What sort of pushback do you get?
Well, a lot of them will say, we don't have the funding for this right now. We're focused on the trial. And the irony is that, your trial is going to be set up better for success if you do integrate patient input earlier. And so, the biggest barrier is, resources. But if you can get them to think that, to understand that everything they do as a company will be better because of engagement with patients and input from patient communities, they get that. And I think a lot of people say, oh, it's too early. Let us know when you're in phase 3. Let us know, reach out to us when we're in phase 3 or about to launch. That's when we'll go out and introduce ourselves to the patients. And again, whether it's rare or pretty much any condition these days, if you show up that late to the game, patients are going to not trust you and not give you the intel that's so valuable because they're going to think you're coming to them to help sell something or launch a commercial program. And so I think that's it. And I mean, that's our big MO, is changing the way these leaders think about this, and that it's not just going to a fundraising dinner. It's about bringing patients literally and figuratively to the table, channeling their insights and integrating it into everything they do. And we're starting to see that over the last 5 to 10 years. We're seeing a lot more early stage or early clinical stage companies engaging in this work because they recognize that it's not just the right thing to do, but that it's also good business sense. There was a study published by my friends over at the Tufts University Center for the Study of Drug Development a few years ago that demonstrated a cumulative impact of proactive patient engagement, right? So when you listen and you create something that addresses their unmet needs, these things, not just the checks and grants and sponsorships, but if you can avoid a protocol amendment, if you can accelerate clinical study enrollment or improve retention, it can enhance the company's net present value substantially. And investment in these patient-centered activities can have really an exponential ROI. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's good business sense. So I understand that, companies who launch are strapped, but if you can spend a little bit of time and money and energy on bringing patients to hear them, it can enhance all of your functions, And again, patient advocacy used to be kind of a nice to have, but now it's a critical business function. And I love it when I see companies with somebody on the leadership team, a chief patient officer, who actually is representing the patient around the board table. It's refreshing, and we're seeing that increasingly every year. There are more and more companies like that.
It's interesting that you bring up sort of the ROI on the advocacy. Do you find that, I'm interested, have VCs come to you and said, here's our stable of companies, we need to do this?
Absolutely.
Or your outreach to them?
It's a little bit of both, but a company came to us last summer, and they had a portfolio company who was having trouble recruiting for a phase 3 trial in a rare condition. Part of the reason that they were having trouble recruiting was because it was a really fragmented condition that was rare and didn't actually have a patient community. I think they had like a loosely monitored Facebook discussion group, but there was no community. And so they enlisted our support to coalesce this community and galvanize this global condition and bring patients and caregivers to the table and launch a nonprofit that connected them, educated them, updated them on clinical trials. None of these patients who joined, I think there are over 500 of them now, none of these patients had ever met anybody with the condition that they were diagnosed with until this group was created. And now, they have strong industry support, and they have robust educational programming and we actually just convened this group for their first patient meeting, and it was inspiring. I mean, patients were coming from all over the globe and crying and hugging, and it was really satisfying, not just for us who played a role in this, but for the company that had the vision to enlist our services to do this, because they knew that there was an unmet need. They knew that this community needed to be formalized, and launching this was probably what I'm most proud of in the work that I've done.
So the company buys into your concept, but then how, particularly in this case, let's say, how do you actually go about nuts and bolts building that community?
Yeah, so we leveraged like I said, we have a social listening platform that we can find patients talking about the condition, and you can quickly identify who the movers and shakers are, who are trying to build grassroots movements, and analyze where they are and what they're saying and what the unmet needs are. And it really starts, with just building trust with them and saying we're thinking about, bringing this community to the forefront and building a nonprofit. Is that something we never want to go in with an agenda, right? We want to hear from them that validation that, yes, we'd love to have a platform that connects us and inspires us and educates us and keeps us updated on, clinical trials and other important, um, you know, initiatives that are relevant and germane to their condition. So we'll go out and build a website, and we'll bring patients to the table for a sort of a roundtable discussion to query them on this concept of, would you like an advocacy group to represent you? And then it's, finding the leadership and getting funding and, creating a cadence of communications and newsletters and all that. And then eventually you can get to point of critical mass when you have a network of people who are really enthusiastic, who want to lead, and you place the leaders in place, and then you bring them together as formally as a community, for in-person meetings. And it's amazing. And then once you do a little bit of that, they want more. And these folks, patients who live with a condition that they've never really been able to figure out, it's so great to see them come together and lead, because they're so hungry to help people who are going through what they went through a couple of years ago when they were diagnosed and there was nothing out there. These are the very people who are on the front lines helping newly diagnosed folks and bring them into the community. So it's and it it reflects really well on the company who decided to invest in something that on the face of it didn't really enhance their bottom line, or it's hard to measure this work, right? It's not, it's very it's not black and white, right? It's the right thing to do, and it has business upside. But a lot of times when they're looking at the CFO is looking at the balance sheet, $500,000, that's a lot to, what are we going to get out of this? Let me suggest to you that this company, that this VC that had the vision and foresight to have us build this community for them, is getting that ROI and goodwill and reputation and building trust throughout the community every day, and it's profound.
So much, maybe all of the funding comes from the company for the group. Is it all, or do you go to other outside sources?
No, our business model is we'll partner with the company. We'll work for the company and have an MSA and an SOW, and we'll do the work, the strategic work, help the companies think through how they want to show up in these patient communities, and we'll go out and do the tactical execution, the blocking and tackling. And it's so different. I mean, sometimes the engagement could be just assembling a patient leadership council, which is like a formal advisory board for a company that has representatives from the conditions that they're invested in and have clinical trials for. Sometimes it's, going out and working with patients to support, newborn screening legislation in states, right? Sometimes it's educational programming, hosting educational webinars, bringing new data to them. The work manifests itself so differently depending on the need of the company, the stage of the company, and the nuances of the disease. We've done a lot of patient videos, right? Just like I never thought I'd be in the video business, but it's a tactic, it's a resource that is so valuable, and it got even more in demand during COVID. Really, and like I said, the trust really that you can establish gives you the ability to do things that you wouldn't do without the trust. And getting somebody with a devastating condition to open up about what it's like to live with it. We have our video team go out and film these stories, and they just come out so incredibly impactful, and they're so compelling and raw. And a company can put that on their website, to show that they're, this is the study, this is the condition that we're trying to fix, and this is how it impacts people. So the work is so different, and that's what I love about it, as opposed to being just embedded in one disease area or one therapeutic area like I was at some companies. It's really exciting to be have our hand in so many different things.
Are there instances where the company initially said or thought to themselves, we need to do this, and either through walks or whatever the case may be, but maybe they started the process and they got into it a little more deeply than they had originally planned, and they just kind of botched it, and you had to come in and fix it? Are there any instances that you've experienced?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are missteps.
What happened?
Yeah, it's a great question, because again, like, it's well intentioned, but a lot of leadership teams will just not prioritize this from a resource standpoint and think that they can do it on their own, right? A lot of CEOs will say, well, I'll be the advocacy guy and have it as a pet project. And it's such an important business function now that you really can't do it half-heartedly. But a lot of leadership teams will, try to do the advocacy work themselves when that's not their primary function. And I think a lot of companies, their missteps result in letting some of these patient groups down, because they show up, this ivory white company with all these great intentions, and sometimes the follow through isn't there, and the funding might be there, but again, these patient groups and patient advocacy organizations want a sustainable, strategic, proactive partner, not just somebody who calls when they need it. So we try to streamline that and go in, and we have gone in and fixed things. But I think the bottom line answer is you really need somebody dedicated. And if it's us, if you're not at a position yet to centralize the function internally, we can do we can assess the stakeholders and identify who you should be and start to build those relationships so that when you are at the trigger point, is maybe it's going into phase 2 or 3, that you're going to hire somebody to represent, the patient communities in your company and be the chief patient officer, the VP of patient engagement. We have the strategy and we have the relationships and we have some tactics and initiatives that are ongoing that we can hand over on a silver platter to whoever they hire.
Has there been a case where you weren't able to overcome the prior missteps?
Not that I can
Or
think
that was
of.
especially, I mean, the old saying that it takes a lifetime to create integrity and a
Yeah.
heartbeat to lose it.
Exactly. It takes
So,
it takes an eternity to build trust, and it takes just one no show on a call, or
right.
oh, we can't support that gala dinner that we said we would, or we can't, support that patient meeting. After all, we just had our earnings report and we don't have the funds, that 2 years of trust building evaporates in an instant. So it's really nuanced. I mean, we preach authenticity all the time because, there are a lot of PR firms and law firms and lobby shops in DC that are starting to do this work. But they don't have the deep roots in the patient community that my team has. I mean, I have a team of 12 or 13 right now, and half of them actually come from the rare disease space as either a patient or a caregiver, in addition to the subject matter expertise, whether it's advocacy or graphic design or, our videographers, like they actually come from rare, so they know rare. So it gives us a lot more access, if you will, and I think it accelerates the trust building. But authenticity is kind of how we differentiate ourselves from some of the other bigger firms that might not have the deep relationships with the patient groups. Because again, the patients are, I've said it 3 times, the patients themselves and patient groups are so sophisticated that, if they, and you need to build that trust before you need something from them. And I think a lot of companies will just pick up the phone. A CEO will say, we're working in disease X. We need this from you. And if you haven't established that foundational baseline of trust, they're not going to show up and do what you need them to. So it takes some time and it takes some investment, but everybody who has done this the right way, companies, they wish they had done it sooner. And every stakeholder out there, even the FDA, recommend strongly that patients in industry communicate and engage early and often. And so there's really no downside. It's just a matter of, putting their money where their mouth is and saying, yes, we are going to do this work that we talk about in all of our pitch decks at JP Morgan and such.
How much typically does it cost a
Oh
company?
gosh, it's all over the place. But like I said, there's a lot you can do. You don't have to do everything, but you have to do something. Bringing a virtual patient advisory board meeting together, is really short money. I mean, if you had, an, a, 10 patients on a 1 hour or 2 hour Q&A with a clinical team or a CEO, that would be, not a very expensive undertaking, but it's
It's
all.
affordable for even the most.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Much less than they'd spend on, I don't know what they spend money on, but for what
Right.
they spend on CROs and management consulting and whatnot, like you're going to see a dose response, if you will, in everything you do in this work
Can they start there and then progress as
and
they
scale.
grow? Let's say maybe they're preclinical at that stage, and then just sort of
Absolutely.
progress and
Yeah.
pay as they go if they're
Start slow,
funds.
start small, start slow, and realize that, wow, like I said, there's a dose response. Everything we do, like we got a great partnership out of that one encounter, whatever it might be. We got great intel. We went a long way in building trust. We want to do more, and it's absolutely very scalable because then you can double down on it and you can have, 4 more things that came from the initial discussion that you had in the sort of pilot assessment of the engagement, and then you're off to the races. And then, you have these you have these army of champions who believe in your company and want to socialize your clinical trial and help amplify milestones like data readouts, right? I mean, if you have the trust of these folks who have come to the table and listened to you, and you've listened to them, and you as a CEO have done things as a company that takes what you heard and puts it into action, then when there is a data readout, it's not just the company amplifying it externally, it's these patients from the very community that the study has data on who are going to extol the virtue of this company and help them galvanize the community to go to an advisory committee meeting and help get something approved and then get it covered with payers. So these armies of champions, you can't get that overnight. So the earlier you start this work, the more loyal these folks are going to be to you when you do need something as a company.
So let's talk about clinical trials again for a minute, because I'm sure all you have to do is read one issue of Endpoints. They come out with 5 a day, right? And you'll see that AI to find patients for clinical trials is all the rage. There must be dozens and dozens of companies attempting to use AI to do that. Does that make your job easier or more difficult?
I think it harmonizes the work we do. I think it validates the work we do, and I think it can help it. I mean, you still are. AI is never going to take the place of personal relationships, and AI is never going to really build trust, but it can guide you in the right direction, and it can point you to clues that, these patients might be looking for this. Here's where they are. We're working with a company that's uses machine learning to create adaptive clinical trials where a failed program might actually, if this machine learning algorithm can interpret the data, it can find hidden signals that could actually open up. Well, this failed its primary endpoint, but if the data was recut, and if the study, went a little longer, and we looked at these endpoints, then actually this signal could reveal that it could, in fact, become statistically significant, and they could meet their endpoints. So there's so much innovation out there. It's hard to keep track of all of it, but I think it only helps connect the dots between sponsors and patients. I mean, I think the statistic is still accurate. Almost 50% of clinical trials under enroll, especially in rare, because they're hard to find these patients. And I think, the combination of technology like artificial intelligence with the traditional model of, building trust and listening to patients, I think has a synergistic effect, and I think will accelerate study enrollment and support retention and get better data out there, and ultimately get better treatments and hopefully cures for patients with these conditions.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of my next question. I think that common sense kind of tells me that this sort of activity would help dramatically in terms of retention, particularly
Absolutely.
in the face of, um, difficult reactions to whatever drug they're being given.
Yeah, I mean, when we have a patient video that a site can share at each visit with the patient about what to expect about this particular step in the process, spinal tap, or here's an infusion, and this is what to expect. And when you go home, you're going to feel like this, like those things. We do a lot of patient videos and other educational resources that the patient groups can use, but also that the sites can use for retention, because you want somebody to know what to expect when they embark on this journey. And the more you can educate them and communicate with them, and the sites a lot of times don't have the bandwidth to spend as much time as they need to. So if we can help them do a better job, a more effective job of making a patient feel like they know what to expect, everybody wins.
Do you ever, in that instance, communicate directly with the withdrawing patient?
We do not, no. We do not. We just, on behalf of the company, will provide the sites with resources that they can use to, we try to stay away from direct patient care due to HIPAA and other considerations, but you know, we can support the people that are in the mix with resources that make it easier for them to hold on to these patients and get them through to the end.
So, one other thing I think about as we change administrations here, and there's going to be a lot of change at NIH, at HHS, the CDC, et cetera. I would think that this sort of activity would be even more necessary, even more before we get to that change, when people are wondering what that change might be
and how it might impact them.
and how it might impact them. There's fear both on the part of the company, but also on the part of the patient. Are we still going to be able to get that vaccine, or whatever the case may be? I would think that it would be even more important.
Yeah, I think it's as important as it's ever been for patients to have a platform to amplify their voice and make people at the top who are making these policy decisions understand that we need access, we need health equity, we need innovative treatments, and that, anything that inhibits progress in life science innovation isn't good for patients, isn't good for business, and isn't good for the healthcare system. So yeah, I mean, I think patients are mobilizing as we speak to continue to have a voice. And if they feel that there's a threat that they don't, I think that's just going to motivate them and empower them even more to step forth and represent themselves and their condition and just healthcare system in general.
Talk about a couple of other sort of, I guess, philosophical questions. For instance, so many of the new therapeutics that are coming out today are tremendously expensive. The GLP-1s, the CRISPR sickle cell treatment, so many of them. And so we have to balance, how do we pay for that, one, and then as well, who gets it as a result of the fact that we sort of have to ration money and therefore care. How do you think about that in terms of your work?
Yeah, it's a big question. If I could solve that, I'd probably be
Yeah, but you must have thought about it a little bit.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I've seen the power of value-based contracting, right? Where, if a payer only pays for a gene therapy if it works. I think efficient contracting models and access policies, I think they have to be balanced. But I mean, innovation is only as valuable as the patient's ability to access it, right? So like, it's great to have a shiny new treatment, whatever it might be, but if the patient can't get it or have exorbitant out-of-pocket costs, it doesn't, there's no innovation there because it's not getting to the bedside. So I think companies need to amplify the needs of patients to payers long before they have a commercial product. I think it's an education thing, and I think it's just a consistent messaging thing around this innovation is transformative. If you look at bleeding disorders, right, hemophilia, those gene therapies are expensive, but if you have hemophilia B or A and you're on a clotting factor at the age of 2 for your whole life, I think the average patient is on like three or $400,000 a year of clotting factor over the course of 50 or 70 years. That's a lot more than a gene therapy that corrects the condition that's $1.5 or $2 million. So I think we need to however it pans out, I just think we need to continue to have dialogue from the industry, the patient, and the payer to continue to amplify the value proposition and protect as much access. I mean, the GLP-1s are certainly the story of 2024, right? And it's had transformative effects on people. And I was just talking with my primary care physician the other day about this. It's a wonder drug for those who would otherwise have diabetes, heart disease, all these chronic conditions. but and it pays for itself in, avoidance of, these interventions that they would ultimately need. But, where do you draw the line, right? Because somebody who's pre-diabetic, should they go on it? I don't know. So there are a lot of unanswered questions, but I think if you have patients at the forefront representing themselves and amplifying the need for patients to harness innovation, and I think the companies need to also be at the table well before they have a drug to get approved, so that there's a mutual understanding of what we're trying to do here. But I think value-based contracting, I know in some other countries, they just provide, a lump sum of, $25 million, and anybody in your country who is diagnosed and prescribed GLP-1 gets it. And I think that's another variation of this value-based contracting, but, pay for performance, I guess. It only, you only pay for it if it works. And I think any payer, especially in rare disease, as devastating as they can be, would gladly cover a advanced treatment if it works and cures a kid with, epidermolysis bullosa who is has, you know, cysts all over his body, and eventually before he's 10 or 12 is going to die from an infection. Like, if you can reverse that, I think that's the best money you could spend. But
Sure.
it's a profound,
Do,
big
do
question.
you do you get involved once you put this partnership, company and patients together? Do you get involved with payers? And if you do, how do you do it? And at what stage do you do it?
We do. I mean, most of the time it's reactive, unfortunately, right? A company will have something that has kind of flown under the radar and been covered, and then as more patients have been prescribed it, payers start to put forth, restrictive access policies. And so it's a very reactive play, but that's when we'll activate the patients that we have in our network to whatever the call to action is. A lot of times it's, say step therapy, right? Or non-medical switching or copay accumulator, or all these vehicles that payers have to ration or restrict access to treatments. You have to fail these 7 things that you've already failed. You just switched insurance companies and now you have to fail it again. Like, that's absurd. So, a lot of states now, state legislatures will have active legislation that limits the impact of non-medical switching or step therapy or whatever the access barrier might be. And so, the companies that have us doing that for them usually have favorable outcomes because we've activated these patients in a way that have educated policymakers, lawmakers, others who are deciding just how far these restrictive policies can go, if you can limit them. And like step therapy is a prime example. Like, there's several states now have legislation that really limits the ability of a payer to make somebody have to go through all these different steps before they get the innovator treatment.
Mike, I'm so interested, and I didn't think that this sort of work was being done. I guess I'm like everyone else. I just thought it sort of happened, you know.
Sometimes it
Oh,
does. Sometimes it does organically, but it needs to have a strategic sort of roadmap around it. And I think you need to know what you're doing and how you're doing it and be deliberate. And but a lot of times that can change, right? A company can go in with this vision, but the more that vision can evolve and be informed by the needs of the patient community along the way. And I think that's how you show you're the best possible life science partner, that you can be nimble and scrappy enough to, to be flexible and find ways to address patient needs while you're shepherding your program through to approval.
it's a great way to think about your patients and providing for them in the best way that you can ultimately, and really understanding what their needs are.
Absolutely. And it goes a long way for, for a company who's coming out of stealth mode and wants to be thought of, perceived as a leader in whatever condition they're invested in. Having that patient voice, helping them do that is so powerful. I mean, we've even brought we've brought patients with CEOs on investor pitches at JP Morgan, which is really a non-traditional activity. It's really never been done, but we started doing it, and it's incredibly profound because a CEO can talk about a disease all they want, and and this is what the KOLs say, and this is what we think. But if you have a patient right there who can really organically and rawly expose the unmet needs and thus the market opportunity, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story, Mike. Thank you so much for spending some time with us to share your work at Patient Advocacy Strategy. And I wish you all the luck in the world as time goes on.
I appreciate the opportunity, Tim. It's been a pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed talking with you. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.